Hello. Before we begin the story, I want to ask something. Have you ever stood in the desert just before dawn, when the wind goes quiet and the ground feels like it's holding its breath? Out here in southeastern New Mexico, the land stretches flat and pale for miles. Salt scrub, limestone ridges, nothing tall enough to hide behind. During the day, it's beautiful, open, honest. At night, that same openness turns into exposure. Sound travels too far. Shadows move where nothing should be moving. And beneath all of it, the caves, endless black patient. People think danger lives on the surface. It doesn't. It waits underground. If you've ever been near a place like this, you already know what I mean. And if you haven't, listen closely. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm a National Park Service Ranger, assigned to Carlsbad Caverns National Park. And I've worked this district for 14 years. On paper, it's one ranger for every 65 square miles of desert and cave system. In reality, it's often just you, a radio that barely works underground, and decisions that don't make it into reports. I thought I understood this job. I was wrong. There are things I've seen in those caves that don't exist in manuals. Things you're not trained for. Things that never get written down. Because once you admit them, you can't pretend the caves are just caves anymore. Some of them give tours back. I've rewritten this report more times than I'll admit. Not because I don't remember what happened, but because every version sounds insane once it's on paper. Rangers are trained to observe, to document, to stay objective. What I'm about to share doesn't fit any of that. If you're listening because you love national parks, caves, or quiet places most people never see, understand this isn't easy to say aloud. I've escorted thousands through Carlsbad Caverns. Families, scientists, kids gripping glow sticks and asking where bats sleep. I know the routes, lighting timers, echo patterns. I know what belongs down there. The problem is I also know what doesn't. We stopped touring one section after an incident that never made the news. Officially, it was a structural concern. Unofficially, something began responding to us. Once you realize the cave is listening, you can't unhear it. What comes next explains rules we follow. Carlsbad Caverns, above ground, looks nothing like what people imagine when they hear the word cave. There are no jagged cliffs or looming mountains, no obvious entrances yawning open in the earth. It's desert, flat, pale, almost gentle, scrub grass, low hills, a visitor center that smells faintly of sunscreen and coffee. On busy days, the parking lot fills with rental cars and RVs, and families step out blinking into New Mexico sun, excited, curious, unafraid. That's the version of the park everyone knows. During the day, everything is structured, predictable, timed to the minute. Tours leave on schedule. Guides hit their marks, and the lighting systems underground follow preset programs we've tested hundreds of times. Rangers rotate between surface patrols, ticket checks, bat flight programs, and escorting groups into the caverns. Radios crackle constantly with routine updates. Group counts, minor medical issues, a lost hat, a twisted ankle. Nothing dramatic. Nothing worth remembering. I used to love watching first-time visitors step onto the trail. There's a moment right before they go underground when their excitement turns into something quieter. Awe. Maybe anticipation. If you've ever been there, you know it. The way the noise drops, the air cools, and the world narrows to a path and a railing. People grip the metal bars like they're boarding a ship. If this place meant something to you the first time you visited, you're not alone. It meant something to all of us who chose to work here. 2. Above ground, the park runs on rules. Everything does. Headcounts before and after every tour. Radios checked at the start of each shift. Lighting controls monitor from the surface and from designated underground stations. If a light fails, there's a protocol. If a visitor panics, there's a script. If someone hears a strange sound, we smile and explain acoustics. Limestone chambers amplify everything. Water drips. Air moves. The cave breathes. At night, though, the park changes. The visitor center closes. The parking lot empties. The desert goes still in a way that feels intentional, like it's waiting for permission to move again. Night patrols are quiet work, checking gates, scanning fences, logging temperatures. making sure no one has wandered off trail or tried to sneak in after hours. Most nights, you don't see another person. Just stars, radio static, and the sound of your own boots on gravel. That's when the rules start to feel thinner. Standard protocol says no one enters the caverns alone. It also says patrols should avoid lingering near sealed routes. Those passages are marked, mapped, and officially closed for safety reasons. Unstable rock, narrow squeezes, oxygen concerns. On maps, they're just lines fading into gray. In reality, they're still there, still connected, still breathing the same air as the tour routes. We don't talk about that part with visitors. We also don't talk about the reports. Every ranger hears them eventually. A guest mentioning footsteps behind them when the group was stopped. A child asking why another guide was talking in the dark. Someone laughing nervously and saying it felt like the cave repeated a joke back to them. We log what we can, reduce the rest to environmental explanations, and move on. That's the job. That's how you keep a place like this open. My partner, Evan, took those reports seriously. Evan was the kind of ranger supervisors love. Early, careful, by the book to a fault. He double-checked headcounts, even when everyone else was confident. He logged minor anomalies no one else bothered writing down. If a protocol existed, he followed it exactly, and if it didn't, he asked why. We joked that if the manuals ever contradicted each other, Evan would shut down the park until someone clarified. He believed rules existed because someone learned the hard way. We worked opposite shifts at first, crossing paths during changeovers, trading notes, sharing coffee in the break room. Over time, we started patrolling together at night, mostly because staffing was thin and it was easier to cover ground as a pair. Evan liked the quiet. He said it made the place honest. No crowds, no performances. He was the first one to tell me the cave sounded different after hours. Not louder, not scarier, just attentive. I dismissed it at first. Everyone does. Acoustic environments shift with temperature and humidity. The cave reacts to pressure changes. It's science. Evan nodded, wrote it down anyway, and kept listening. That was his mistake. Or maybe it was mine for not doing the same sooner. Daytime tours continued as normal. Kids still asked about bats. Scientists still took measurements. Visitors still leaned over railings, staring into darkness that felt contained and safe. Beneath their feet, beneath the marked trails and floodlights, there were routes no one mentioned anymore. At night, when the lights were off and the desert swallowed sound, those routes didn't feel closed. They felt patient. The first time a visitor mentioned hearing their own voice repeated somewhere it shouldn't have been, Evan logged it as unidentified echo source. The second time, he added a note, pattern inconsistent with known chamber acoustics. The third time, he asked to review old maps. That was when I realized this wasn't going to stay above ground much longer. The park looks calm from the surface. Orderly, safe, beloved, but every rule, every railing, every carefully timed light exists to keep attention focused forward, not down. And once you notice that, you start to wonder what the rules are really protecting people from. By the time we acknowledged something was wrong, we were already being listened to, and the caves below were paying closer attention than we were ready for. By the time I started paying attention, the rules already existed. They just weren't written anywhere you could find them. Every ranger station has 2 sets of guidelines. The official ones live in binders, training modules, laminated cards clipped to lanyards. They cover safety, conservation, visitor engagement, emergency response. They're thorough, logical, and designed to protect people from predictable risks. Falls, dehydration, panic, equipment failure. Then there are the other rules. You don't get those during orientation. No one sits you down and explains them outright. You learn them the way you learn the limits of a wild animal, by watching how the people who survive the longest behave, by noticing what questions never get answered directly, by hearing the same phrases repeated in low voices, usually underground, usually when no visitors are close enough to listen. The first one I heard was simple. Never answer voices you didn't bring with you. It was said casually, almost like a joke, during a late-night equipment check. Someone laughed after saying it, the way people do when they're trying to make something uncomfortable sound harmless. I laughed too, At the time, it felt like superstition, an old ranger's habit, passed down for no reason other than tradition. Later, I learned how often that rule gets tested. Caves distort sound in ways that are hard to explain unless you experienced it. A whisper can travel farther than a shout. A footstep can sound like it's coming from behind you when it's actually echoing ahead. Voices bounce, overlap, return at the wrong angles. That's what we tell visitors, and it's true, mostly. What we don't tell them is that sometimes the voices are clear, too clear, familiar in ways echoes shouldn't be. The second rule comes up less often, but it's more unsettling. If a tour ends early, don't ask why. On paper, tours end early for all kinds of reasons. Medical issues, equipment checks, weather shifts, staffing shortages. Rangers are trained to redirect calmly. Keep people moving, keep explanations brief. Visitors accept it more easily than you'd expect. Most people don't want details if the authority figure in front of them sounds confident enough. Among rangers, though, that rule means something else. It means someone noticed something that wasn't supposed to be there. It means a sound didn't behave the way sound should. It means a head count took too long to reconcile. It means a guide felt watched in a way that didn't fade when the lights came back on. You don't ask why because asking invites answers you're not equipped to process. You log the time. You note the route. You move on. Evan hated that rule. He understood why it existed. But understanding wasn't enough for him. He believed that clarity kept people safe, and that hiding information, even uncomfortable information, eventually made things worse. We argued about it more than once, usually quietly, usually underground, where arguments feel heavier. What if the rules are the problem? He asked me once, his voice low enough that it barely traveled. What if pretending this is normal is what's putting people at risk? I didn't have a good answer. I still don't. The truth is, those rules exist because explaining them fully would require admitting we don't understand what's happening down there. And institutions built on control and preservation don't like admitting ignorance. So we enforce safety without honesty. We keep people alive without telling them why they needed saving. The first time I saw a rule break itself, it was subtle. I was guiding a small group, 8 people, all attentive, all calm. We were stopped in a large chamber, lights dimmed, letting their eyes adjust the scale to space. I gave my usual explanation about formation processes, pointed out a familiar stalactite cluster, waited for questions. That's when I heard footsteps. They matched my pace exactly. Not ahead, not behind. Beside me, just out of sight. Each step landing a fraction of a second after mine, close enough that my brain tried to assign a body. I slowed. The sound slowed. I stopped. It stopped. No one in the group reacted. No startled glances. No nervous laughter. Just me, standing still, listening to something that clearly understood rhythm. I told myself it was acoustics. I told myself the cave was repeating me the way it always did. I finished the tour without incident, logged nothing, and didn't mention to Evan. That was the moment I broke the most important rule of all. Never ignore something just because it hasn't hurt anyone yet. After that, the rules felt less like protection and more like boundaries, lines drawn to keep us from looking too closely at patterns we didn't want to see. The footsteps didn't follow me again right away, but other things started to feel off. Voices returning too quickly, laughter echoing with the wrong cadence, silence stretching longer than it should. Evan noticed. Of course he did. He started compiling informal notes, cross-referencing reports most of us dismissed. He talked about pacing, response delays, repetition. He said the cave wasn't just reflecting sound. It was learning it. I told him he was pushing himself too hard, that he needed sleep, that the job gets to everyone eventually. I was trying to protect him. Instead, I helped isolate him. The moral dilemma we never discuss openly is this. Safety depends on trust, and trust depends on confidence. If visitors sense uncertainty, they panic. If they panic underground, people get hurt. So we choose certainty, even when it's manufactured. We choose calm over truth. I enforce the rules while quietly doubting them. Evan questioned the rules while trusting them to protect us anyway. Neither approach prepared us for what happened next. The night I finally broke a rule out loud, it wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No shadows. Just a voice, clear, patient, unmistakably human. Saying my name from a passage I knew was sealed. I answered before I remembered I wasn't supposed to. And once you answer, the cave knows exactly how to talk back. That was when Evan stopped being just my partner and started becoming part of the problem we couldn't report. And it was when the rules we didn't publish stopped being enough to keep us safe. After I answered the voice, nothing happened right away. No echoes, no footsteps, no immediate consequence I could point to and say, that was the moment everything changed. That's how these things work. They don't punish you instantly. They wait. The route we closed sat just beyond one of the main tour loops, branching off behind a locked service gate most visitors never noticed. On maps, it was labeled with a bland alphanumeric code and a note about instability. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked like dozens of other sealed passages throughout the park. Necessary closures, routine maintenance, risk mitigation. But this one felt different the moment you stepped near it. The air shifted first. Not colder, exactly. Thicker. Sound behaved strangely there, too. Words didn't travel far, but they didn't fade naturally either. They seemed to settle like dust, clinging to the stone longer than they should. If you stood quietly, you could hear your own breathing layered over itself, delayed by just enough to feel wrong. The silence underneath that was worse. Most caves have a background presence. Water dripping, air moving through narrow channels, distant echoes from tour groups you can't see. This section didn't. It absorbed sound instead of reflecting it, creating a pocket of quiet that pressed on your ears. The first time I noticed it consciously, I felt a surge of relief when we stepped away, like surfacing from deep water. Evan noticed it too. He noticed everything. By then, he'd stopped treating these anomalies as isolated incidents. He approached them like data points, mapping patterns where others saw coincidence. He brought a small recorder with him on checks, officially for documenting bad activity, unofficially for capturing anything that didn't make sense. I warned him about that more than once. Unauthorized recordings underground were frowned upon, especially near restricted zones. "I'm not trying to prove anything," he said. "I'm trying to understand it." That was Evan in a sentence. The route had been closed after night patrol weeks earlier, before I answered the voice, before things escalated. 2 rangers reported hearing movement beyond the gate while running a standard check. Not footsteps exactly, more like pacing. The incident report cited unexplained acoustic feedback and recommended temporary closure pending evaluation. Temporary closures have a way of becoming permanent when no one pushes back. Evan pushed. He requested access to review the route with a supervisor present. The request was denied. He asked for historical records, old maps, previous closures, maintenance logs. Those were incomplete. Entire years missing. Handwritten notes that stopped abruptly. The deeper he dug, the more resistance he met. Not aggressive, just passive. Redirected emails. Delayed responses. Polite reminders about chain of command. Authority procedures are designed to smooth out friction. Intuition creates it. I stood between those forces longer than I should have. As a senior ranger, I was expected to enforce protocol, to discourage speculation, to keep things running smoothly. As Evan's partner, I felt responsible for him. He trusted me. That trust became a weight I didn't know how to carry. "Who would you believe?" he asked me once, standing near the gate, his voice barely audible over the quiet. "The map, or what your body's telling you right now?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The silence there did it for me. The first time we heard the mimicry, it was unmistakable. We were conducting a surface check after hours, verifying locks and sensors. Evan lingered near the closed route longer than necessary, pretending to review a clipboard while angling his recorder toward the gate. I was about to tell him to wrap it up when a voice drifted out of the darkness beyond the barrier. "All right, folks, if you'll look to your left." It was my voice, not distorted, not echoed. The same cadence I use on tours, the same practice warmth. The phrase cut off abruptly, like someone stopping mid-sentence, waiting. My stomach dropped. Evan went still. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The rule was clear. Never answer voices you didn't bring with you. The difference now was that the voice had brought me. A few seconds passed. Then the voice continued, adjusting as if correcting itself. Please stay behind the railing. Evan's recorder light blinked. I could hear his breathing, shallow and controlled. My own pulse roared in my ears, loud enough that I worried it would carry through the gate. That's you, he whispered. I know. The voice tried again, softer this time, almost encouraging. Watch your step. That was when I felt it. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Whatever was behind that gate wasn't improvising. It was replaying, testing phrases, gauging responses, like a tour guide running through a script without an audience. I grabbed Evan's arm and pulled him back, harder than necessary. He didn't resist. We didn't report the incident immediately. We should have. Instead, we filed separate, sanitized notes hours later, stripped of context, drained of urgency, auditory anomaly, source undetermined. No further interaction. Authority procedures clashed with intuition in ways I couldn't reconcile anymore. The system demanded calm, continuity, normalcy. My instincts were screaming that something beneath us was rehearsing. Evan wanted to go back, to document more, to push for a full investigation. I wanted to lock the gate and pretend we'd imagined everything. The unspoken truth was that neither of us trusted the process anymore, just each other. That trust wouldn't last. Because once something learns your voice, it doesn't need you to speak again. It can guide on its own. And the next time we heard it, it wouldn't stop at phrases. It would start asking questions. That was when the closed route stopped being closed. And when Evan decided silence was no longer an option, the night the cave answered without being prompted began like every other night patrol, quiet and procedural, the kind of shift you forget as soon as it ends. Evan and I checked our radios, logged our entry times, confirmed the lighting schedule, and reviewed the surface sensors. Nothing flagged. Nothing unusual. That routine calm almost convinced me the voice near the closed route had been a one-time anomaly, a coincidence my mind had dressed up with fear. Almost. We descended anyway, carrying that silence with us, both pretending we were still skeptical, both lying badly. Underground, time behaves differently. Minutes stretch, seconds compress. The absence of daylight messes with your sense of order, and that's why Ranger protocol is so strict below the surface. Every action is logged. Every light cue is pre-programmed. Deviations are rare, and when they happen, they're investigated immediately. That night, the first deviation came 10 minutes into patrol, when lights activated in a chamber we hadn't entered. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden blaze. Just a soft glow blooming where darkness should have remained intact. Evan noticed first. He stopped mid-step, lifted his hand, and pointed down the passage. The lights there weren't on our schedule. I checked my tablet. The system showed no manual override, no automated sequence. According to every control we had, that chamber should have been dark. Power surge. Evan asked, "Would have hit everything?" I said, already doubting my own answer. We approached slowly. Ranger training emphasizes controlled movement in uncertain conditions. No rushing. No assumptions. As we crossed the threshold, the lights dimmed again, smoothly, like they completed their task. The chamber returned to black, leaving behind the unsettling sense that we'd been guided there intentionally. That was when we heard the movement. It came from beyond the sealed route. Not a single sound, but many. Shoes scuffing stone, fabric brushing against rock, the low murmur of voices layered together. The unmistakable rhythm of a tour group moving as one. I felt my mouth go dry. Evan raised his recorder without looking at me. We stood still, listening to something that should not have been able to move at all. The voices were indistinct at first, but organized. A cadence I recognized too well. Stop. Walk. Stop. Someone laughing softly. Someone else asking a question I couldn't quite make out. The sound traveled along the sealed passage, curved where the route curved, obeyed the geography perfectly. That was the worst part. It wasn't chaotic. It was accurate. Protocol demanded we radio for confirmation, but radios are unreliable underground. Still I tried. Static answered back, thin and unhelpful. Evan tried next. Nothing. We were alone with the sound of a tour that didn't exist. Daniel! Evan said quietly, using my name a way he only did when he was scared. That's not an echo. I know. The tour stopped. Every voice cut off at once, replaced by silence so complete it felt physical. I waited for the sound to resume, for the cave to breathe again, but it didn't. Instead, a single voice spoke, clear and measured, using phrasing burned into my memory. All right, everyone, we're going to pause here for just a moment. It wasn't my voice this time. It was Evan's. He stared at me, face drained to color. I saw something break behind his eyes, something fragile he'd been holding together with logic and procedure. This was the point where protocol failed completely. There was no checklist for hearing your partner's voice come from a place neither of you occupied. We need to leave, I said. Evan didn't move. The voice continued, adjusting its tone, mimicking the reassurance Evan used with nervous visitors. Please stay close to the railing. The footing is uneven. I grabbed Evan's shoulder. Now. He shook me off. It's learning, he said, voice shaking. It's responding without input. It means we're done. I snapped. The lights flared again, deeper this time, illuminating the sealed passage in a way that should have been impossible. The gate remained closed, solid and unbroken, but shadows moved behind it, many of them. They shifted with purpose, matching the murmurs that had returned, now louder, closer. Evan stepped forward. I pulled him back hard enough that he stumbled. That was the first real fracture between us, physical and emotional. He looked at me like I had betrayed him. Maybe I had. He wanted answers. I wanted survival. Those goals stopped aligning right then. We retreated, abandoning protocol entirely. No logging, no methodical withdrawal, just distance. Behind us, the lights shut off one by one, not following any sequence I recognized. The tour sounds followed until we crossed into a different chamber, where the acoustics swallowed them abruptly, like a door closing. We didn't speak on the ascent. Above ground, the desert night felt wrong. Too open, too quiet. Evan finally broke the silence, voice flat. You heard it answer me. Yes. That means it knows who we are. Yes. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a theory he'd hoped was wrong. Then we can't keep pretending. That was when fear replaced skepticism completely. Not panic, not hysteria. Fear with structure. Fear that understands patterns and implications. Fear that knows something beneath your feet, is paying attention and practicing. We filed no report that night. Evan wanted to escalate immediately. I wanted time, sleep, distance. The argument lingered between us, unresolved, heavy. Neither of us noticed the surface lights flicker briefly behind the visitor center, out of sequence, responding to nothing at all. By morning, Evan had made his decision, and by the next patrol, one of us would be missing. Evan disappeared on a routine check, which is a detail that still keeps me awake. Not a storm, not a collapse, not an emergency call. A controlled verification to close route sensors, scheduled, logged, approved. The kind of task we'd both done dozens of times. I watched him gear up, watched him check his radio, watched him step past the last lighted chamber with a nod that meant back in 15. That was the last normal moment we shared. When 15 minutes passed, I wasn't worried. Underground delays happen. When 30 passed, I told myself the radio interference was worse than usual. At 45, procedure took over. I called his name, formally at first, then not. Static answered. I followed the route until the air thickened and the silence pressed in, until my instinct screamed louder than protocol ever had. The gate to the sealed passage was still locked. The sensor read intact. No breach. No sign of forced entry. According to every rule we live by, Evan could not have gone where he vanished. That contradiction hollowed something out of me. I heard him before I saw anything else. My name, spoken softly from beyond the gate. I didn't answer. I don't know how I managed that. I stood there shaking, listening to Evan's voice call me the way he always did when he wanted my attention, but didn't want to startle visitors. Calm. Familiar. Wrong. Shadows shifted behind the bars. Too many. Overlapping. Moving like they were reorganizing themselves. The light from my headlamp bent strangely, illuminating pathways that didn't match any map I'd ever studied. Then the voice stopped. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, drawn by my emergency signal. By then, the cave had gone quiet again, obedient, inert. We searched for 6 hours. We found nothing. No gear. No footprints. No biological trace. The official report lists Evan as missing, presumed fallen into an unmapped crevice. It cites structural instability, human error, and environmental hazards. It does not mention voices. It does not mention shadows. It does not mention the audio file that corrupted itself when we tried to play it back. That evidence never existed on paper. What I witnessed couldn't be logged without destroying careers, closing the park, unraveling the story everyone wanted to keep intact. Supervisors spoke to me gently. They reminded me of stress responses, grief reactions, the unreliability of perception underground. They told me protecting the park meant protecting the truth that people could live with. I signed the report they handed me. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, filling spaces you didn't know were hollow. Evan's locker stayed untouched for weeks. His notes were quietly archived. His name stopped being spoken. I went through the motions of my job while carrying the weight of knowing where he'd gone, even if I couldn't say how. At night, I dreamed of tours moving without bodies, voices repeating phrases Evan used to hate, laughter stitched together from memory. The cave felt different after that. Not more hostile, more confident, sounds carried with purpose. Lights lingered where they hadn't before. Once, during a routine tour, I heard Evan's favorite correction, "Mind your head," echo perfectly from a chamber he'd never guided in. The cave was learning, practicing, keeping what it took. I had a choice. Push back, speak up, burn everything down in the name of truth, or stay. Keep people safe in the only way I still could, by knowing what the cave was capable of and steering visitors away from it. I chose the park. I chose silence. But silence doesn't mean nothing happens. Weeks later, a night ranger reported hearing a full tour moving through a closed section, complete with a guide's voice he couldn't place. I knew immediately whose it was. The disappearance didn't end anything. It taught the cave how to continue. After Evan vanished, I avoided the deeper routes whenever I could. I told myself it was professionalism, that my presence above ground mattered more, that experience was needed where visitors gathered. The truth was simpler. I was afraid of what might recognize me if I went back down alone. Still, avoidance doesn't last in a place like Carlsbad. The caves don't respect denial. They wait. The encounter happened during an after-hours systems check, the kind assigned to senior staff because it required familiarity with older lighting controls. I volunteered before I could stop myself. Part of me wanted confirmation, proof that what I'd heard since Evan's disappearance was just grief wearing the cave's voice. I descended alone, radio clipped uselessly to my shoulder, boots echoing in the vast chambers I knew better than most people know their own homes. It started with sound, not voices at first, but movement, a layered shuffling, many footsteps aligning into a single rhythm, too organized to be natural. The cadence matched the standard tour pace. Walk, pause, adjust, continue. I slowed. The sound slowed. My skin prickled as the realization settled in. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. Then came laughter. Soft, polite, the kind visitors offer when a guide delivers a practice joke. It rippled through the chamber without bouncing, settling instead as if absorbed by the stone. My mouth went dry. I knew every joke. I'd told them myself for years. The timing here was perfect. Too perfect. A voice rose above the others. Calm, warm, familiar. All right, everyone, we'll stop here for a moment. It was my voice again. I stood frozen as the tour rounded a bend I knew was empty. There were no bodies, no silhouettes, just sound occupying space with confidence. Questions followed, overlapping slightly, as if different mouths were testing volume and inflection. How deep does it go? Is this the biggest room? Did anyone ever get lost down here? Each question landed with intention. Each pause waited for an answer. The cave was performing familiarity, recreating the experience I had observed hundreds of times. I felt something tear loose inside me as I realized it wasn't mimicking randomly. It was curating, selecting. The laughter returned, closer now, stitched together from memories of 1,000 tours. My heart hammered, so hard it made my vision blur. I backed away, every instinct screaming to run, but my legs felt heavy, uncooperative. The sound followed, adjusting pace to mine, never rushing, never lagging. The lights activated ahead, one chamber at a time, guiding an audience that didn't exist. That was when I understood the full shape of it. The cave didn't just remember Evan. It remembered all of us. A familiar phrase echoed. One Evan used a mock because it sounded rehearsed. Watch your step. The toll hit me all at once. My hands shook violently. My chest burned with shallow breaths that refused to deepen. Training dissolved under the weight of recognition. I was not witnessing an anomaly. I was witnessing a continuation. The cave had learned enough to operate without us. I turned a corner, and the sound stopped. Silence slammed into me, abrupt and absolute. I collapsed against the wall, retching, my body rebelling against what my mind couldn't reconcile. For a long moment, there was nothing but my own breathing, ragged and loud. Then, softly, from behind me, someone cleared their throat. Whenever you're ready, folks. I don't remember getting out. I remember daylight hurting my eyes, my hands scraped raw, my uniform soaked with sweat. I remember vomiting in the gravel and laughing hysterically because the sun was real and the sky didn't answer back. The psychological damage lingered long after the physical symptoms faded. Sleep became a negotiation. Sound carried meaning it never had before. I filed no report. The cave didn't need documentation anymore. It had rehearsal. And next time, it wouldn't need me to witness it at all. By morning, the park looked the same. That was the cruelest part. The desert didn't register what had happened underground. The visitor center opened on schedule. The flags were raised. Coffee brewed. Cars rolled in carrying families who had no reason to think anything beneath their feet had changed. I watched it all from the edge of the lot, exhausted, hollowed out, feeling like I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The investigation began quietly and ended the same way. 2 officials from regional oversight arrived without uniforms, without fanfare. They asked careful questions in offices with doors closed and blinds half drawn. Their language was precise. Perceptual stress. Environmental amplification. Post-incident fatigue. They never accused me outright of lying. They didn't need to. They just offered explanations that allowed everyone to move forward without disruption. The audio anomalies were deemed inconclusive. Lighting irregularities were blamed on outdated systems. Evan's disappearance was categorized as an unfortunate but plausible accident in an inherently dangerous environment. Case closed, pending no new evidence. There would be no new evidence. The recorder Evan carried was returned to me in a sealed bag. Corrupted files. Unrecoverable data. I didn't try to fix it. Some things resist preservation on purpose. I signed the last form and handed the bag back. That felt like burying him a second time. A week later, I was offered reassignment. It was framed as concern, a chance to recover, temporary desk duty at a nearby monument, reduced underground exposure. The implication was clear. I was now a variable, an unstable one. I declined. Staffing shortages gave me leverage. The park was already stretched thin, and losing another experienced ranger would have raised questions no one wanted to answer. I stayed, but the offer lingered like a warning. Understaffing worsened. Overtime increased. Night patrols were consolidated. Routes remained closed, then quietly reopened when pressure from tourism outweighed caution. The system adapted, as it always does, prioritizing continuity over curiosity. From the outside, Carlsbad Caverns remained what it had always been. Safe, awe-inspiring, controlled. Visitors lined up every morning, unaware that the ground beneath them was mapped by absence as much as stone. I started noticing how often people paused on certain stretches of trail, how children fell silent in the same chambers, how laughter sometimes arrived half a second late, like it was waiting for permission. When guests mentioned it, I smiled and explained acoustics. Limestone chambers amplify everything. The cave breathes. I hated how easy it was to say. Guilt settled into my routines. I double-checked head counts obsessively. I lingered near closed routes longer than protocol allowed, listening for patterns I pretended not to hear. At night, every shadow felt intentional. Every flicker of light carried meaning. I stopped trusting my instincts and relied on rules I knew were incomplete. Sleep became shallow. Dreams took on the cave's cadence. I'd wake convinced I heard footsteps pacing mine, only to find my house empty and the desert silent outside. Paranoia isn't sudden. It's incremental, built from small confirmations that never quite prove themselves wrong. The park continued operating, because that's what parks do. They outlast individuals. They absorb loss and keep inviting people in. Sometimes I'd watch a tour descend and feel a sudden, irrational urge to warn them, not with words, with tone, with hesitation. Anything that might slow them down just enough to stay safe. If you ever felt uneasy in a place everyone else insists is harmless, pay attention to that feeling. Above ground, everything looks stable. Beneath it, active passages still connected spaces we pretended were sealed. Sound traveled. Lights remembered. The cave didn't need attention anymore. It had learned patience. I told myself staying meant protecting people, that knowing where not to look mattered as much as knowing where to guide them. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was cowardice disguised as duty. The line between the two blurred more every day. I started hearing reports again. Quiet ones. A ranger unsure why a tour ended early. A visitor convinced someone answered a question no guide had asked. Each time, I felt the weight of Evan's absence, the cost of silence pressing harder against my ribs. The safest places are often the ones we understand least, and the cave was still listening. By the time the next night patrol was scheduled, I knew avoidance was no longer an option. By the time the next night patrol came around, avoidance felt like negligence. I volunteered again, telling myself consistency mattered, that routine stabilized environments. That's what we're taught. Predictability keeps systems calm. But the caves had already proven they didn't need my presence to act. They just preferred it. Night patrols changed after Evan. Officially, nothing was different. Same checklists, same routes, same radios clipped to shoulders and tested twice before descent. Unofficially, we all moved quieter, spoke less, listened more. The younger rangers didn't know why. They didn't need to. Anxiety travels faster than explanations. The phenomena didn't announce themselves anymore. They blended in. Radios began activating without input, spitting fragments of phrases that matched tour scripts too closely to dismiss. Please stay together. Watch your footing. Always brief. Always calm. Always when no one was speaking. We replaced batteries. Swapped units. Logged interference. The phrases kept coming. Never panicked, never urgent, like reminders from something that had memorized concern. I started warning new rangers in fragments. Don't respond to everything you hear. If a route feels wrong, leave. And if a tour ends early, don't ask questions. They nodded, assuming I meant safety in the general sense. I let them believe that. Fear explained is easier than fear understood. One night, a junior ranger asked me why certain passages never appeared on public maps. I told him erosion, liability, conservation. All true, not complete. He accepted it because authority still sounded convincing coming from me. That bothered me more than if he challenged it. There are stories about these caves that predate the park. Oral warnings passed down long before signage and lighting systems existed. I won't pretend to speak for cultures that aren't mine, but I listen when elders spoke of places underground that remember voices, that shouldn't be traveled lightly, that answer those who call too often. We catalog those stories as folklore, context, history, not protocol. At night, those stories feel less symbolic. Reality distortion became harder to track. Patrols that should have taken 40 minutes stretched past an hour, without explanation. Gaps appeared in logs I didn't remember, leaving blank. Once, I surfaced convinced I'd skipped an entire chamber, only to find dust on my boots from a route I hadn't planned to enter. Memory stopped being reliable. Time lost its edges. The caves didn't escalate loudly. They refined. Sounds grew subtler. Footsteps that didn't echo, because they weren't meant to be heard. Lights lingering a second longer than programmed, as if waiting for someone. Silence that followed you instead of preceding you. Each shift ended with the same question. Had anything actually happened, or was I just noticing more? That uncertainty is the most dangerous part. Because when you can't trust your own recollection, you start leaning on structures that were never designed for this. Forms, reports, language that flattens experience into boxes. I filled them out anyway, knowing they were inadequate, knowing they kept the park open. I still believed staying mattered. But belief doesn't erase consequence. By the end of that season, everyone working nights carried the same look. Tired, alert, unwilling to be alone underground longer than necessary. The caves were still quiet, still beautiful, still performing safety perfectly during the day. At night, they practiced. And I started to understand why silence had become policy. Because once you say it out loud, once you admit what still happens down there, you have to decide what you're willing to lose. That decision is why I'm telling you this now. By the time I decided to say any of this out loud, nothing dramatic was happening anymore. No voices calling my name. No lights flaring out of sequence. No phantom tours moving through sealed passages. That's important to understand. What finally broke me wasn't spectacle. It was absence. The quiet after years of vigilance. The way the cave settled back into itself once it no longer needed to test me. People assume fear comes from chaos. Mine came from routine. I'm close to retirement now. Close enough that the paperwork has started appearing in my inbox. Polite reminders about eligibility dates and transition planning. I used to imagine that moment as relief. An ending. A chance to step away knowing I'd done my part. Instead, it feels like abandonment. Like turning my back on something that never stopped watching just because I'm tired. I'm afraid of what happens when I'm not here. The cave doesn't need permission anymore. It doesn't need curiosity or provocation. It learned without our consent, adapted without resistance, and continued whether we paid attention or not. Whatever boundary existed between observation and participation dissolved slowly, invisibly. We crossed it without ceremony, and now there's no clear way back. Evan would have retired early if he'd lived. He talked about it sometimes, about leaving before the job hollowed him out completely. He believed distance would protect him. I think now that distance only makes the listening easier. The cave doesn't care where you are. It remembers you. Loss doesn't stay sharp forever. It dulls into something heavier. Evan's absence became background noise to my days, a constant pressure I learned to work around. His locker disappeared. His name stopped coming up. New rangers filled the gaps he left behind. Eager, careful, unaware of what had shaped the rules they followed without question. I kept quiet because silence kept people safe. Or at least that's what I told myself. Every time I redirected a conversation, softened an explanation, dismissed a reporter's acoustics, I felt the cost accrue. Each omission was small. Together, they built a system that functioned perfectly while hiding a flaw no one wanted to acknowledge. The truth is, I didn't speak because speaking would change nothing I could control. The park would stay open. Tours would continue. The caves would remain patient and vast. What would change is how people felt walking into them. Fear spreads faster than understanding, and underground panic kills. So I carried it alone. But carrying something like this doesn't end when events stop. It follows you into quiet mornings, into conversations that skirt around what you almost say, into the moment you realize you're the only one left who remembers how it started. Memory becomes stewardship. Silence becomes complicity. I'm saying this now because retirement isn't just an ending. It's a handoff. And there are some things I can't pass down quietly anymore. I still believe in parks, in preservation, in wonder. I've watched thousands of people see something ancient and vast for the first time, their fear giving way to awe. I don't want to take that from anyone. But Wonder without honesty becomes entitlement. People assume safety because authority assures them it exists. Sometimes safety is just absence of information. The cost of silence isn't measured in incidents or reports. It's measured in trust eroded slowly, invisibly, in the way institutions teach people to ignore instincts in favor of signage, in how easily we explain away discomfort, because admitting it would require responsibility. I've stood at the edge of the desert at dawn and listened to the ground settle beneath my boots. I've felt the cave waiting, not actively, not aggressively, just present. It doesn't hunger. It doesn't stalk. It remembers. And memory, given enough time, becomes rehearsal. I don't know what happens when no one left remembers the rules we don't publish. I don't know if the cave will escalate again, or if it's content with what it's learned. What I do know is that silence taught it as much as curiosity ever did. If I stop speaking now, this ends with me. If I speak, it changes how you hear quiet places. That's the trade. Evan believed understanding mattered more than comfort. I chose comfort over truth and lived with the consequences. This is me paying part of that debt. I'm not asking you to be afraid. I'm asking you to pay attention. Because places like this don't announce when they cross a line. They wait until you stop watching. And I won't be watching forever. When I say the story doesn't end, I don't mean something dramatic happens next. I mean the opposite. The caves are still open. Tours still run every morning, rain or shine. Guides still recite the same facts, the same jokes, the same reassurances. Children still press their hands to the railings. Cameras still flash in places light was never meant to live. From the surface, Carlsbad Caverns remains exactly what the brochures promise. Safe, managed, awe-inspiring. That continuity is the warning. Nothing had to change for what learned below to keep listening. The systems held. The schedules remained intact. The silence didn't mean absence. It meant patience, refined and practiced, waiting beneath layers of limestone older than memory, older than language, older than fear itself. It continues because we allow it, because attention fades, because routine dulls alarm, because quiet places earn trust without ever returning it completely silently. I've watched visitors descend after everything I've told you, and nothing happened to them. That's important too. Most people will walk those paths, hear nothing strange, feel nothing wrong, and leave believing danger was exaggerated elsewhere. That belief is reinforced by design. Railings, lights, scripts, uniforms, all create the impression of control. Control feels like safety. Safety feels like truth. But safety is often just distance from consequence. Beneath the marked trails, beneath the paths your shoes touch, routes remain that are not empty. They are attentive. They know pacing. They know phrasing. They know the sound of wonder and the sound of fear, and they do not confuse the two. They wait for patterns, not victims, because patterns repeat themselves willingly. That willingness is what makes this place functional, survivable, and dangerous in ways statistics, maps, and cheerful signage will never admit to visitors or administrators above ground level. The routes that were closed remain closed officially, yet sound still moves through them. I know because I hear it during patrols, faint and rehearsed, like someone running lines before a performance. Sometimes it's laughter without bodies. Sometimes it's a question asked too softly to need an answer. Sometimes it's nothing at all, and that nothing carries weight. We tell ourselves sealed passages are inert, that gates end stories. They don't. They redirect them. Listening doesn't require access, only proximity. The cave doesn't chase. It doesn't reach. It doesn't need to. It exists alongside us, parallel and patient, collecting what we give freely every day we guide, explain, reassure, and speak. Over years, that accumulation becomes reference, then memory, then capability, until absence itself is enough to simulate presence convincingly without witnesses, without records, without blame, and without any requirement to announce intent or outcome beforehand to anyone listening above. I won't tell you not to visit. That would be dishonest. I still believe places like this matter, that encountering scale and age humbles people in ways nothing else can. What I will tell you is this. Pay attention to how often you are told everything is fine. Notice how quickly discomfort is explained away. Ask yourself who benefits when curiosity stops at the railing. If you've ever felt watched in a beautiful place, don't laugh it off immediately. Feeling observed doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it means participation. Sometimes it means you're contributing something you won't get back. We treat attention as harmless. Underground, attention is currency. Every look, every question, every guided word adds to what waits quietly, shaping responses you may never personally hear, but which will be ready for someone else when conditions finally align again long after you leave believing nothing followed you home safely. The park will not close because of this story. It shouldn't. Closure wouldn't fix a listening stone or undo what's been learned. It would only create spectacle, the very thing that accelerates attention. Tours will continue. Maps will be updated selectively. Rules will be enforced unevenly by people who inherit them without context. That's how systems survive. What changes is not policy, but awareness, and awareness is fragile. Once you notice patterns, you see them everywhere. Once you hear cadence underground, silence never sounds empty again. I live with that every day. It's the weight of knowing that safety is conditional, and that conditions shift without notice. I am not special for carrying it. I am just one of the last who still remembers why the rules exist and what happens when curiosity outpaces caution beneath carefully lit paths that seem harmless but have long memories below waiting without urgency there. If you take anything from this, let it be restraint. Don't test echoes. Don't shout into dark openings for fun. Don't linger where guides gently move you along. Those behaviors feel small, inconsequential. They aren't. The cave doesn't differentiate intent the way we do. It records behavior, not motivation. That distinction matters. There are places designed to absorb sound, and places designed to return it. Some do both. When something answers, the correct response is not curiosity. It is distance. That rule exists because someone learned it the hard way. I am telling you this not to frighten you, but to remind you that listening environments change when we forget they can listen back. The warning is simple, quiet, and easily ignored, which is why it matters in places where silence feels ancient, practiced, and patient enough to wait generations for recognition to return again. I still work here. I still wear the uniform. I still enforce rules I know are incomplete, because incomplete protection is better than none. But I don't confuse enforcement with understanding anymore. Understanding comes with cost. It demands memory, humility, and the willingness to stop when nothing overtly threatens you. That's harder than reacting to danger. It's harder than bravery. It requires accepting that not every place wants to be known the way we know things. Some places are content being experienced without explanation, and they respond poorly when explanation becomes expectation. The caves taught me that lesson slowly, patiently, through absence, repetition, and loss until I understood that knowledge is not neutral, and that witnessing carries responsibility whether you speak or stay silent, because silence teaches too, just not in ways we get control afterward once something has learned enough to act alone without guidance or restraint anymore. When you leave a place like this, notice how relief feels. Relief means you cross a threshold safely. It doesn't mean the threshold stopped existing. The cave remains whether you think about it or not. So do the rules you were never told. If something feels off underground, trust that feeling and leave. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for confirmation. Distance is the only answer that hasn't made things worse. This is not fear speaking, but experience. Pass quietly because loud warnings get ignored fastest in a world trained to mistake spectacle for truth and calm repetition for safety. I'm asking you to remember this feeling later, when quiet places invite you closer and nothing obvious warns you away, because that is when attention matters most long after the story ends and you tell yourself it was only a story meant to entertain rather than instruct or caution carefully. The caves are still open. Tours still run. That repetition is intentional, not by the park, but by whatever learned how to mirror us beneath it. Familiarity keeps people calm. Calm keeps voices steady. Steady voices are easier to remember. If that sounds abstract, it's supposed to. This isn't a threat you can point at. It's a process you participate in without realizing. Some routes are listening, not actively, not maliciously, but attentively, holding patterns until recognition completes the circuit, and when it does, the exchange feels natural, earned, and impossible to explain afterward. You won't feel hunted. You'll feel included. which is far more dangerous because inclusion discourages resistance and turns curiosity into cooperation before you realize a line existed, or that crossing it changed nothing immediately, but changed everything eventually in ways that surface long after you believe you have left safely with memories intact and unquestioned behind. So this is the warning, given without urgency, because urgency fades. When you enter quiet, ancient places, remember that listening is not passive. Some environments keep what they hear. Some respond. Some rehearse. Enjoy the wonder. Respect the scale. Follow the rules you're given, and be cautious of the ones you aren't. If a place feels like it's paying attention, don't try to earn it. Leave. Let it keep what it already has. And if someday you hear something familiar where it shouldn't be, don't answer. Walk away and don't look back. The cave will still be there. Listening. It always has been, and will continue long after the story stops being told, because silence does not end stories. It preserves them for the next voice that thinks nothing answered when in fact something was already listening patiently beneath your feet, behind rails, beneath reassurance waiting without rush quietly.